Trust. It's the glue that holds the fabric of our relationships together, isn't it? We trust our families, our friends, our leaders. But what happens when that trust shatters? Not in some dramatic, distant explosion, but in a subtle, intimate betrayal that comes from someone you never suspected? Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the Stoic emperor revered for his wisdom, lived a life dedicated to reason, virtue, and self-control. But even he wasn't immune to the sting of betrayal. And not just any betrayal, a betrayal by someone within arm's reach, someone he relied upon, confided in, trusted. Imagine this. The man who wrote Meditations, who preached that we must control our reactions to external events, faced a situation that would test even his most steadfast beliefs. How did he respond? Did his Stoic philosophy save him? Or did the weight of human emotion push even the great Marcus Aurelius to his breaking point? Let's unravel this story together, piece by piece. Let's begin by rewinding to ancient Rome, a civilization unmatched in its splendor, but also infamous for its intrigue and treachery. Amid this grandeur was Marcus Aurelius, a ruler unlike any the world had seen before or would see again. He wasn't a war-hungry conqueror or a cunning political manipulator. No, Marcus Aurelius was something much rarer, a philosopher on a throne. Imagine him for a moment, a man burdened with the weight of an empire stretching across continents, yet sitting quietly in the dim light of a Roman study, writing in his personal journal. These were not the musings of an emperor puffed up by power, but the reflections of a soul wrestling with the fragility of human nature. Now think about the demands of such a life. No matter how wise or self-reliant Marcus was, even he couldn't rule an empire alone. He needed allies, people he could trust to execute his vision, share his burdens, and act as his extensions across the sprawling Roman world. And among these allies stood Cassius. Cassius wasn't just a trusted advisor. He was a symbol of everything Marcus Aurelius believed in. Cassius was intelligent, charismatic, and seemingly loyal. To Marcus, he wasn't just a subordinate. He was a partner in the grand experiment of ruling with reason and justice. But here's where we must pause. Because trust is a curious thing, isn't it? We give it freely to those we deem worthy, but in doing so, we hand them the keys to our most vulnerable places. Isn't that paradoxical? The people closest to us, the ones we rely on the most, are also the ones who can destroy us with a single act. So, as Marcus shared his strategies, his ideals, and perhaps even his doubts with Cassius, he couldn't have known that he was also arming the man who would one day betray him. But isn't that how betrayal often works? It's not the blow from an enemy that devastates us. It's the knife in the back from someone we called a friend. And yet, Marcus Aurelius wasn't naive. His Stoic philosophy taught him to expect the worst from people. He wrote in Meditations, "Say to yourself first thing in the morning, 'Today I shall meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and unsocial.'" But here's the twist. While Marcus understood the fallibility of human nature, he also believed in the potential for virtue. He didn't want to become cynical. He chose to trust Cassius, not because he was blind to the risks, but because he believed that trust was essential to creating something greater than himself. And so, the stage was set. The philosopher emperor, guided by principles of reason and justice, and his trusted advisor, outwardly loyal but secretly harboring ambitions of his own. Doesn't this make you wonder? How often do we put our faith in others, knowing full well that betrayal is always a possibility? Is trust a strength, or is it a vulnerability? As we move forward, let's delve deeper into the story of Marcus and Cassius, because what happens next is not just a tale of betrayal, but a profound exploration of human nature and the power of philosophy to navigate even the deepest wounds. Here's the irony. The closer someone stands to you, the less you see the shadow they might cast. Marcus Aurelius, for all his wisdom, was no exception to this human blind spot. While he governed with integrity and sought to lead by example, the seeds of betrayal were quietly taking root, not far from his side. Cassius, the man Marcus trusted deeply, had begun to envision a different kind of future. One where Rome wasn't led by a philosopher who wrestled with questions of virtue and justice, but by a commander who could seize and impose power decisively. Cassius wasn't just ambitious. He was a product of Rome's brutal political climate, a place where trust was often a dangerous luxury. Now let's pause for a second. Imagine yourself in Cassius's position. You're standing in the shadow of an emperor admired by many but seen as vulnerable by others. Marcus's stoic approach to leadership, his patience, his reflective nature, may have seemed to some like a weakness rather than a strength. Perhaps Cassius thought he could do better. Or maybe, deep down, he resented Marcus's unwavering morality, something that made Cassius feel inadequate in comparison. Whatever the reason, betrayal often starts not with action but with justification. It whispers to us, doesn't it? That voice that says, I deserve more. I could do this better. The world would thank me for taking what's mine. And so, Cassius began to plan. At first it was subtle. A question here, a doubt planted there. People in positions of power have always known this. A coup isn't launched with swords, it starts with whispers. Cassius began to gather supporters, feeding on the discontent of those who thought Marcus's rule was too philosophical, too lenient, too slow for Rome's ambitions. And yet, all this happened under Marcus's nose. Doesn't that make you wonder? How often do we overlook the signs of betrayal because we don't want to see them? Maybe Marcus sensed something. Maybe he noticed the hesitation in Cassius's words or the growing silence in his presence. But here's the thing. When you believe in someone, truly believe in them, your mind often protects that belief at all costs. But betrayal doesn't wait for permission. It grows. It thrives in the cracks of trust. And soon, Cassius's ambition turned into action. He declared himself emperor, an act that wasn't just treason. It was a personal attack on everything Marcus stood for. This wasn't just about politics. It was about philosophy. How would a Stoic emperor respond to such an intimate betrayal? Would he lash out in anger, seeking vengeance like so many rulers before him? Or would he hold true to the principles he had spent a lifetime cultivating? But before we get to that, let me ask you something. If you were in Marcus's position, betrayed by someone you trusted implicitly, what would you do? Could you look past the personal wound and act in the interest of something greater? Or would the pain consume you? These aren't easy questions, are they? They're the kind of questions that don't just challenge the mind, they pierce the heart. But Marcus Aurelius wasn't just any ruler. He was a man who believed that even in the face of betrayal, there was room for reason, for understanding, for something higher. Let's explore how he responded, because it's in his response that we find the heart of Stoicism, and perhaps the answer to our own struggles with trust and loss. Betrayal has a way of dragging us into the depths of our most primal emotions. Rage, despair, even a hunger for revenge. For many leaders, a betrayal like Cassius's would have been met with swift and ruthless retribution. After all, treason wasn't just a threat to the throne, it was a deeply personal wound. But Marcus Aurelius wasn't just any leader, was he? When Marcus received news of Cassius's rebellion, it would have been easy for him to let anger take the reins. Imagine it for a moment. One of his closest advisors, a man he trusted to uphold Rome's stability, had turned on him. Cassius had declared himself emperor, challenging Marcus not only politically but philosophically. A man whom Marcus had treated with dignity and respect now sought to overthrow him. Most rulers would react without hesitation, crush the rebellion, make an example of the traitor, and solidify their power. But Marcus was guided by something deeper than instinct or ego. He was a Stoic, and this betrayal was his ultimate test. Now pause for a second. What would you do in his position? Could you keep your composure? Could you resist the urge to retaliate? Because here's the thing. Marcus didn't see Cassius's rebellion as merely a political issue. It was a chance to practice the very philosophy he had spent his life cultivating, and here's where it gets fascinating. Marcus's first response wasn't rage, it was reflection. He asked himself, what lies within my control? This is the cornerstone of Stoicism, the understanding that we cannot control the actions of others, only how we respond to them. Cassius's betrayal was beyond his control, but Marcus's reaction was not. Instead of launching a campaign of vengeance, Marcus chose to act with restraint. He didn't demonize Cassius or paint him as an irredeemable villain. In fact, he wrote to the Senate and urged them not to treat Cassius's supporters harshly. Why? Because Marcus believed that cruelty, even in response to treachery, only perpetuates a cycle of harm. Think about that for a moment. A man with absolute power, a man who could have ordered the execution of everyone involved, chose mercy. Does that make him weak? Or does it make him stronger than most of us can imagine? Marcus saw the rebellion not as a personal attack, but as an opportunity to lead by example. He once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy," and here he was living those words. But let's not romanticize this. Restraint isn't easy. It's not glamorous. It's not the kind of response that makes for epic tales of conquest. It's a slow, deliberate choice to rise above the chaos. And it's painful. Marcus had to endure the sting of betrayal while maintaining his composure, knowing that his actions would define not just his legacy, but the very principles of Stoicism he held dear. So what does this teach us? It's easy to preach philosophy when life is smooth, but the real test comes when the storm hits. Marcus could have let Cassius's betrayal define him, drag him into the mire of anger and resentment. Instead, he chose to stay true to his values even when it hurt. But let me ask you, would you have done the same? Could you rise above your emotions, your instincts, and choose mercy over vengeance? Most of us like to think we could, but would we? Marcus Aurelius's response wasn't just a lesson in leadership. It was a profound demonstration of what it means to live by a philosophy. To take the high road not because it's easy, but because it's right. But there's still one question left to answer. Did this act of mercy strengthen his rule, or did it leave him vulnerable? Let's find out. Mercy, restraint, forgiveness. These words sound noble, almost divine. But let's be real, was Marcus Aurelius's approach practical? Did his philosophy hold up in the ruthless arena of Roman politics, or did it leave him exposed to even greater threats? When Marcus chose mercy over vengeance, he wasn't just making a moral decision. He was taking a monumental risk. In Rome, power wasn't just respected, it was feared. And fear was the currency that kept empires intact. To show restraint, to forgive a traitor, was to gamble with not just his reign, but the stability of the empire itself. The Stoic mask cracks. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. The humiliation didn't come from the slave's words alone. It came from the truth behind them. You see, Epictetus had built his philosophy on the idea that external circumstances, poverty, slavery, even physical pain, don't determine your freedom. Your mind does. And yet, here he was visibly shaken, not by chains or suffering, but by a simple question. And let's be honest, isn't that the way it always goes? It's not the big, dramatic moments that break us. It's the quiet truths we've been avoiding. The small, piercing questions that cut through our defenses and leave us exposed. This was Epictetus's moment of reckoning. His philosophy demanded that he remain unperturbed, but his humanity betrayed him. And that's the paradox of being human, isn't it? We strive for ideals, for principles, for unshakable strength, but in the end, we're creatures of emotion, of ego, of vulnerability. And that's not a weakness. It's a reality. The slave's role in the lesson. But here's the twist. The slave wasn't trying to destroy Epictetus. He was teaching him. In his own way, the slave was embodying the very principles of Stoicism. He didn't bow to Epictetus's authority or reputation. He wasn't intimidated by the philosopher's status or his teachings. Instead, he questioned, he challenged, he provoked. And isn't that what true freedom looks like? The courage to question even the most revered ideas? The willingness to confront even the most powerful figures, not out of disrespect, but out of a deep commitment to the truth? The slave's laughter, his words, his audacity, they were a reminder that philosophy isn't about perfection. It's about practice. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to face the questions. The mirror turned to us. But let me ask you something. If you were in that room watching Epictetus falter, what would you feel? Would you feel a sense of vindication seeing the great philosopher humbled? Or would you feel uncomfortable knowing that his struggle is your struggle too? Because let's not kid ourselves. We all wear masks. We all have principles we claim to live by, only to stumble when those principles are tested. How often do you tell yourself you're calm, only to lose your temper over something trivial? How often do you promise yourself you'll be brave, only to back down when fear takes hold? Epictetus's humiliation wasn't just his own, it was ours. It was a reminder that no matter how much we learn, no matter how much we grow, we're all still works in progress. But here's the thing, that's not a failure. It's a gift. Because every crack in the mask, every moment of vulnerability, is an opportunity to grow, to learn, to become more aligned with the truth of who we are and who we want to be. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not about a philosopher being humiliated. It's about a philosopher being human. And in that humanity, finding the strength to keep striving, keep questioning, and keep teaching. So, the question isn't, what would you have done in Epictetus's place? The question is, what will you do the next time your principles are tested? Will you hide behind your mask, or will you embrace the cracks and let the light in? What happened after that fateful confrontation? Did Epictetus retaliate, asserting his authority to save face? Did he dismiss the slave, reduce him to silence, and restore the fragile order of the room? No. Epictetus, true to his teachings, despite his faltering in that moment, did something extraordinary. He listened. He absorbed the lesson even though it stung. Humility in the face of truth. Think about how rare this is. A person in power, humbled publicly, chooses not to lash out but to reflect. That moment of humiliation where Epictetus stood exposed wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. He later spoke of the incident, not as a moment of shame but as a profound teaching. If you wish to improve, he would say, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. What a statement, right? To improve, we must first accept that we're imperfect, that we don't have it all figured out, and that sometimes wisdom comes from the least expected places. And this is where the real brilliance of Stoicism shines. It doesn't promise invincibility. It doesn't suggest you'll never be hurt, humiliated, or betrayed. What it does promise is that every experience, no matter how painful, can be a lesson, a step closer to inner freedom. What does it mean to be truly free? Let's linger on that idea for a moment. Freedom. It's a word we throw around so often that it's lost some of its weight. But what does it really mean to be free? Is it financial independence? Is it having power or status? Or is it something deeper, something less tangible but infinitely more valuable? For Epictetus, freedom wasn't about circumstances. After all, he began life as a slave. His philosophy wasn't born in luxury but in chains. And yet, even after gaining his physical freedom, he knew that true liberation didn't come from external conditions. True freedom, he taught, is the ability to control your mind, your reactions, your perceptions. It's the power to remain unshaken even when the world around you crumbles. But here's the catch. The path to that freedom isn't smooth. It's messy, full of contradictions and uncomfortable truths. It requires facing yourself in the mirror, not just on your best days but on your worst. The confrontation with the slave forced Epictetus to do just that. To acknowledge that even the wisest among us are bound by ego, by pride, by the very human fear of looking foolish. And in doing so, he grew, not in spite of his humiliation but because of it. The slave's legacy. Here's what's fascinating. The slave, nameless and forgotten by history, became one of Epictetus's greatest teachers. Not by offering philosophical arguments or grand insights, but by holding up a mirror to his master's flaws. And isn't that true for all of us? Our greatest lessons often come from the people we least expect. From a child's innocent question that pierces our pretense. From a stranger's criticism that forces us to reevaluate. From moments of vulnerability that we'd rather forget but can't afford to ignore. The slave's challenge wasn't just a lesson for Epictetus. It's a lesson for all of us. It's a reminder that wisdom doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from the margins, from the voices we dismiss or overlook. Let's revisit the aftermath of Cassius's rebellion. News of Marcus's leniency spread quickly. Cassius, however, didn't live to see Marcus's mercy. He was assassinated by his own officers, likely in an attempt to curry favor with the emperor. A betrayal within a betrayal, a poetic irony that Stoicism could hardly predict. But here's the twist. Marcus didn't celebrate Cassius's death. He didn't take it as a victory. Instead, he mourned it. Why? Because for Marcus, this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about maintaining his humanity in a world that demanded he abandon it. He once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." For Marcus, cruelty even toward a traitor would stain his soul. Yet, mercy didn't come without consequences. Some saw it as a sign of weakness. Roman generals, senators, even the common people whispered, was Marcus too soft? Did his stoic ideals blind him to the harsh realities of ruling? After all, an emperor who forgives too easily risks inviting more betrayals. But Marcus wasn't naive. He knew the risks. He understood that mercy could be mistaken for frailty. But here's the genius of it. Marcus wasn't playing the same game as his enemies. While others were consumed by their ambitions and grudges, Marcus was playing for something bigger, something timeless. He was proving a point, that power tempered by virtue is more enduring than power wielded through fear. And history vindicated him. Despite whispers of doubt, Marcus's rule remained stable. The empire didn't crumble under the weight of his compassion. If anything, his legacy grew stronger because of it. Now let's turn this inward. Imagine you're in Marcus's position. Would you risk everything to uphold your values? Or would you compromise just a little to maintain control? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us would bend. We'd justify it as pragmatism, as survival. But Marcus? He stood firm. There's a lesson here that cuts deep. Life will test your values not in moments of ease but in moments of crisis. When the stakes are highest, when the pressure is unbearable, that's when your true philosophy is revealed.